So Cassandra could see the future, and so can I. Back in 2015, I made a prediction of what digital life would look like in the 2020s. And at that point, I suggested that we would see a Snowden moment for data brokers. In my head, the whistleblower I imagined was a woman. The whistleblower came sooner than I predicted, and in the form of a gay man, but he did have pink hair. In 2018, Chris Wiley released a cache of documents to The Guardian that he obtained while working at Cambridge Analytica. These documents detailed the company's data-driven psychographic targeting in elections and exposed the use and abuse of data of up to 87 million Facebook users. So perhaps my vision was a little bit less of a prediction and more of a call to action, because I was looking for a theory of change that would lead us towards imagining how to get people to care about the stakes of their personal data online. So I like to think of Wiley as an honorary modern Cassandra. He was calling out the unjust uses of our data and warning of the impending threats to democracy that we see today. In Greek myth, Cassandra is granted the gift of prophecy, but she is also cursed to not be believed. She sees the future, but her warnings of impending doom are ignored. This cruel fate is imposed on her by the god Apollo after she rescinds her consent to the god. She goes mad as Troy falls. Now, I've been obsessed with this archetype of the Cassandra for a while now, and here's my line-of-cut imagining of her as a tarot card. Now, I created this print just 2 weeks before the Tortured Poets Department anthology was released, which features an entire song devoted to the figure of Cassandra. Now, I will admit, I did not predict that when I pitched this presentation back in January that I would be here talking about Taylor Swift at Republica, but here we are. Maybe this album is the first time you encountered Cassandra's story. Cassandra here appears as a character in Swift's Female Rage the Musical, exploring themes of hysteria, of witches, of women at the margins of society who are not being believed. I agree with Swift that Cassandra is a powerful archetype for channeling all of the frustration and the anger that we feel in examining our current crisis of care. Now, as a woman in tech, I often feel like a Cassandra. As a researcher and an analyst, my job is to predict the future of markets and of tech adoption. But I frequently feel unheard or ahead of my time. I have been told I wasn't a culture fit, or consumers just don't care about privacy, or that the market for books about data was saturated back in 2015. I'm sure you've all seen a few dozen books about data since then. Usually it is older men and people in authority who are resistant to my messages. They want things to stay the same and see me as a threat to the status quo. And to be perfectly honest, for a long time, this started to make me feel like I was going a little mad myself. I've argued for the importance of data privacy and responsible technology long before these issues gained mainstream traction. For example, in 2011, I organized a panel at South by Southwest about paying with data, long before Shoshana Zuboff gave us the language of surveillance capitalism to describe the underlying logics of the internet and digital economies. In 2013, I left a book contract over disagreements with my co-author about the need to make space for conversations about data regulation. Only then to discover a few years later, he was arguing that regulation was not only inevitable, but in fact, preferable. Most recently, in 2022, as an analyst, I was arguing for responsible technology strategies for enterprises after watching the emergence of ethical tech functions at companies like Salesforce and Microsoft and IBM. And yet, the threat of recession meant my keynote spot at our annual tech summit was taken away. I was told no one will care about ethical tech when budgets are tight. By the time ChatGPT came out and had everyone wringing their hands over responsible AI, I had already left. So I've come to embrace this role of the Cassandra, with all the risks involved. And it's heartening to see that others are starting to value this position as well. Humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT has extended the metaphor of our unchecked tech worship, arguing for a future reformation. In his forthcoming book, Greg Epstein describes my role as the tech heretic. Like a Cassandra, the heretic opposes the established beliefs of power structures. He writes, "We need prophetic voices, people who speak truth to powerful leaders of powerful industries, often at great personal risk." So hindsight has shown me that the things that mattered to me back then were the right things. As a young analyst, I was asking the right questions and raising the right concerns. But little me had a lot of trouble trusting my instincts when I had so little external validation for my ideas. And I am not alone. Modern-day Cassandras are our staunchest tech critics. They interrogate our technological systems not because they are opposed to them, but because they care about their impacts. They are often women, people of color, queer folks who face severe repercussions for their crucial, critical insights. Modern-day Cassandras of late capitalism come in many forms. We have the critical researcher. Timnit Gebru was forced out of Google after refusing to retract a research paper that warned of the dangers of large language models in machine learning. We have the organizers. Claire Stapleton and Meredith Whittaker faced retaliation for their roles in orchestrating the 2018 worldwide employee walkout in protest of Google's handling of sexual harassment cases in the workplace. We have the litigant. In 2015, Ellen Powell lost her gender discrimination claims in a wrongful termination case against VC firm Kleiner Perkins when the defense targeted her character and her talents. The claim that Kleiner's culture devalued the contributions of women was very difficult to prove. Still, the trial exposed how Powell was held to impossible double standards. She was criticized both for being too timid and for being too aggressive, for speaking up too much and for not speaking up enough. Now, these Cassandras have the gift of pattern recognition. They embody a deep sense of justice. They speak truth to power. And they work with theories of change on very, very long time horizons. But like Cassandras of the Greek myth, these talents come with a price. You might be familiar with some of these names and say, well, they're getting press, right? Their messages are not being ignored like Cassandra's message was. But I would argue that these women are largely paying a price in the scrutiny of the public eye. And in 2023, articles like this are still being published in the paper of record, the New York Times, featuring only 12 men leading the modern AI movement. Now, I would argue that these men imagine themselves to be empire builders, and that the women of AI are being erased from these tech narratives because we are the scholars, the critics, the Cassandras. And so, we are left pulling our hair out. But tech needs our brave, critical voices to shape the sustainable and just futures that we seek. One etymological definition of a prophet is one who brings down kings. Systems change is brutal work. Being a Cassandra is risky. It can lead to career loss, doxing and harassment, mental health burnout, and marginalization. These women risk their lives and their livelihoods in service of sharing their warnings with the world. Cassandra's fate is tied to her community. She sees her own end and clings to Athena's statue for protection in sanctuary after the sacking of Troy. And still, she is abducted and raped by Ajax and then brought to Agamemnon as a concubine in the spoils of war. Until we change the incentive structures of our present context, Cassandra will remain cursed. So a few weeks ago, I went looking for this statue of Cassandra in the Tuileries in Paris. And at first, I was disappointed to find it covered in plastic tarp and ropes. And then I realized Cassandra was being cared for. She was protected from the elements. She was in maintenance and being restored. And that means this statue will live on and be preserved to continue to tell Cassandra's narrative. But then I thought to myself, what if we imagine Cassandra emerging transformed, as if this were a cocoon? And imagining what that new narrative would look like. One that's more hopeful and, frankly, a little bit more empowering. One of my favorite authors, Rebecca Solnit, has leaned on Cassandra as a fruitful figure for thinking through the Me Too movement. But I want to explore one of Rebecca Solnit's other narrative experiments in reparative retellings of myths and fables. I am inspired personally by her reimagining here of Cinderella Liberator. Instead of being saved by the prince from her lowly status, she frees all the animals that were transformed in service of her trip to the ball. She leaves her wicked stepfamily and opens a bakery, and in the process liberates all the people around her, and including animals. So what happens if we offered a more constructive resolution to Cassandra's curse? I'm not alone in thinking that Greek myths are ripe for revisions. Just this past weekend, the New York Times highlighted the many myths from Circe to Medusa that are getting the feminist retelling treatment update in popular culture. And so with Cassandra, first, it's perhaps worth re-articulating the differences in our present-day reality from the circumstances of Greek myth. Unlike ancient Greece, we are not bound by our fates. Technological progress is not inevitable, and we do have agency. We are not at the mercy of cruel gods. Tech titans are mere mortals, subject to rule of law, or at least they should be, and if they're not, that's cause for a revolution itself. We no longer rely on prophecy or mystic visions. We can believe women and marginalized people's experiences backed up with evidence of those harms. We are not stuck in a prophetic doom loop destined to go mad. We have mental health resources to avoid burnout. So how would the story of Cassandra go if she were cared for instead of marginalized and ignored? Maybe the kings still don't hear her, but others begin to heed her warnings. They start to help break Apollo's curse by amplifying her message. Perhaps they develop a strategy of collective action to avoid the worst. They evade raping and pillaging. They mitigate the harms of war. In my mind, at best, this revisioning of Cassandra's narrative allows her to continue sharing her visions for what comes after the fall of Troy. She has the safety to see beyond her own demise. So now let's revisit the whistleblower with this revisioning in mind. Former civic integrity staffer Frances Haugen disclosed thousands of internal documents exposing the policy exemptions and the mishandling of hate speech at Facebook. And the files also demonstrated that internal Facebook research understood its role in impacting the mental health of youth. The difference here for this Cassandra is that she had an incredible support system behind her from organizations like Reset, Whistleblower Aid, and the Luminate Group. They helped orchestrate her strategy for high-profile impact in the media, in congressional hearings, and in the EU testimony. And even the fact that she focused on the harms of social media on youth generated a kind of moral panic message that was strong enough to rally bipartisan interests. This is what a cared-for Cassandra is capable of. So today, many of tech's Cassandras are gathering the resources to develop these care packages for future Cassandras. Instead of being silenced, there becomes a market for their message. Instead of lacking resources, they are sharing resources. Law and code protects them, and norms are changed through collective action. People like Ifeoma Azoma, who reported Pinterest to the state of California for systemic racism and sexism in the workplace. This Cassandra helped pass the Silenced No More Act, which prohibits companies from using non-disclosure agreements to squelch workers who speak up against discrimination in any form. She built the Tech Worker Handbook and has partnered with organizations like the Signals Network, who provide legal representation, media relations support, psychological support, and digital safety to future whistleblowers. Remember Meredith Whittaker? Well, now her work at Signal advocates for encrypted messaging tools. And I would argue this makes it easier for Cassandra's voice to be heard when she no longer fears the chilling effects of surveillance. When Cassandras lack the resources to continue the data-driven investigative reporting they see so desperately needed, they found their own publications. Julia Angwin and Nabia Saeed have built alternative news institutions that put readers' privacy first and have also explored new means of measuring the impacts of their investigative coverage beyond audience metrics. They also show their work, exposing their methods to amplify Cassandra's instincts with the empirical evidence needed to show the harms that then inform policy decisions. Now, Cassandras may be the first on the chopping block when Elon Musk buys their company, but empowered Cassandras like Ruman Chowdhury do not give up. They develop new methodologies such as red teaming and bias bounties to help mitigate AI harms. And they end up changing industry engineering norms and practices in the process. The signals of the impending fall of Troy are all around us. Failures of institutions, of patriarchy, of exploitative capitalism, of our extractive relationship to the planet. It can be hard to locate hope when it feels like these hegemonic systems are crumbling all around us. Now, for this talk, I focused on our digital Cassandras, but Cassandras show up across all fields. They are warning us of pandemics, of rising sea levels. They are documenting genocide and directing all eyes on Rafah, calling for ceasefire. There are many ways to be a Cassandra, and maybe you all see yourselves in one of these archetypes. Cassandra saw her demise after the fall of Troy. She didn't have the chance to share a more hopeful vision for what came after. She had no safety net to envision a future of mutual aid, of community care, and of feminine abundance. So in our alternative retelling of Cassandra, I imagine that she has the security and the safety to go further and deeper into her vision of what comes after the fall. We must not let Cassandra's voice go unheard. Listen to our Cassandras. Amplify their messages. We also must find new ways of sustaining Cassandra's efforts beyond the philanthropic whims of former tech billionaires who are currently funding many of these Cassandra's work after their breach. We need to fulfill her present needs so that she can survive the fall and continue to share her visions for the future. So I hope this can be a call to action, that we must stand in solidarity with Cassandra, because we are stronger together as the Cassandra Collective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sara, for your presentations. Please stay with me. We have time for a short Q&A if there are any questions from you. I see a question over there. Maybe we can get a mic there.
Thank you. That's a very interesting talk. I just wonder why you didn't mention Julian Assange and why it seems no one at the conference has mentioned Julian Assange. Just curious why.
Fair. No reason, honestly. I think I've mentioned, Chelsea Manning's there on the final slide. I think it's more about methods and various approaches to the legality or the kind of, how do you navigate the system to be able to get the messages out there? But totally fair point, and a precursor to all of this work.
Just on a quick note, Stella Assange was here on Monday, so we did cover it. It's a very important case, and it just went into another round. So thank you for bringing it up. It's pretty important, yeah. Need a mic?
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for the beautiful talk. I was wondering. So we all know that, like in strategic foresight, like the visions from the futures are some kind of instrumentalized from so many different agents. Like, how can we protect Cassandra in this role of being the critic and not being someone else inside the system?
Sure, or co-opted by the strategic foresight economic system. I mean, I think that's a great question because so much of the work it's similar in the signals processing and synthesis, right? It's about seeing where the current state of things are and projecting them out into all the possible futures. And I think there's an important piece of the Cassandra who is asking questions about what the preferable future is and who gets to be a part of the answer to that question. And so to me, it's about having space for the should we do this? Is this the direction that we want to go in collectively? Thank you for that question.
We have time for one more question. Do we have one more question in the audience? Yes, I see somebody in the front.
I mean, is it not in the nature of Cassandra not to be heard? When I blow the whistle, I do not expect to be heard because what the message we carry cannot be heard. So somewhere, maybe it's better to accept that for a long time, you will not be heard and the driver is your hubris, because it's kind of cool to be right 10 years before everyone, and maybe the driver is that, as you make a bet.
You know, I love the fact that you are mansplaining Cassandra to me after sitting here listening to this. My hope is that we can revise the narrative, right? That Cassandra doesn't need to be silenced. And I hope that is the takeaway that you all garner from this.
Thank you very much. Sarah, one last question, because you mentioned Cinderella in Solnit's book. And she, as you said, opens a bakery. Can you see that for yourself? Is that at the end of the line to open a bakery somewhere?
I'm hoping maybe for a cheese shop or a pottery studio. Something calming and a little less stressful than tech criticism.
Perfect. So we can look forward to that. Thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
we'll